Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Poster and I'm the City of Mill Valley Department of Public Works Director. I've been asked to help provide some insight and information to help educate the public on the city's infrastructure needs from staff's perspective. So what I'm going to present today is actually an abridged version of a presentation that I gave in the fall of 2023 to the city's Citizen Advisory Panel that was assigned by your council members to help look into this matter. So I'm going to go back and start with the basics a little bit. What exactly is it that a city does? Well, not surprisingly, this is not an easy answer. It really depends on who you ask. So if you ask the state of California and the Institute of Local Government, you'll see these things here. What you'll notice is some of these things the city actually does themselves, and some of them we actually contract out. So police we do ourselves, but fire is contracted out to the Southern Marin Fire District. Animal control through the County of Marin. And wastewater is done through the sewer agencies of Southern Marin, or as we know them, SASM. Public safety is typically the most important thing that cities do, and this is often reflected in local government's budgets. I haven't looked recently, but typically fire and police make up somewhere in the vicinity 40, 50, even 60% of a city's operations budget. If you ask the White House what it is local agencies are required to do, you'll see this list right here. Now, lucky for the City of Mill Valley, some of these things in the middle, such as housing, medical service, and courts, are run by the County of Marin, while the City of Mill Valley themselves takes care of the other components. I do want to let you know that all the other components, whether it's Parks and Rec, or Police and Fire, Transportation, or Public Works, that actually your Public Works team is involved in all of that work. What is something else that the city has to do? Well, just like citizens have to comply with laws and regulations, the cities have to do that as well. Here are some mandates, as we call them, that have been passed by your local, state, or federal government in recent years. They didn't come with funding. We certainly all want to comply with these types of things, but they do have costs, whether in real dollar amounts or extra work created. Some things on this list that jump out to me are Americans with Disabilities Act. Of course, we want to provide accessible access to all our facilities, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has funds. One simple example of this is, per California state law, when a road is repaved with certain type of paving treatments, you're required to provide an upgrade to the accessible path of travel. What does this really mean? It means pedestrian ramps. When this rule was passed in the early 90s, costs for a typical pedestrian ramp were somewhere in the vicinity of $3,000 to $5,000 each. That equated to a typical intersection with 4 corners, somewhere in the vicinity of $12,000 to $20,000 each intersection. Fast forward to today's world, pedestrian ramps are typically in the vicinity of $10,000 to $15,000 each, or $40,000 to $60,000 per intersection, and that's just the hard cost or the cost for the construction. When you factor in soft costs such as engineering design, engineering administration, awarding the contract, communications with the contractor, mobilization, construction management, inspection services, you can easily plug in a budget of about $75,000 per intersection. This year, for example, we're paving approximately 20 street segments with our paving program. 20 street segments that each have lots of ramps that need to be upgraded. So it's an unfunded mandate that we're happy to comply with, but using this money for ramps more or less takes money that was intended for paving away from the paving, so less streets get paved. It's okay because we're upgrading the city overall and we're providing a better quality of life for everyone, but it's a balancing act. Another thing that's actually not on this list, which is a mandate, or about to become a mandate, is something that we can all agree is a great goal, is a climate action plan. Certainly we all, as citizens, want to reduce our carbon footprint on this earth, but what can we afford? So a current climate action plan, a couple goals that are being moved forward and probably will be adopted, which is, we fully support, is using 15 to 25% recycled asphalt or 50% of recycled paint. I, quite frankly, don't even know how available some of these materials are, let alone what the extra costs can be. You'll see later, we've had a series of studies done and some of our needs are, and it's a project that we have underway right now, is we have an approximate $250,000 pool painting project that's scheduled to happen this summer. So what is that? The building's 20 years old. Near the pool, the facility is humid and moist, and there's rust that's being generated by the moisture of the pool and the hot tub and so forth. And if you look really closely, you'll see some of the steel beams and some of the HVAC systems up top are starting to rust. So we need to go ahead and scrape that and paint that, and it's an expensive process. Now, granted, much of the expense is in the fact that we need to shut the pool down for several weeks. We need to drain the pool. The contractor needs to build scaffolding and special things to access all the nooks and crannies of the ceiling. But we honestly don't know how much the paint material itself is going to cost, let alone the additional cost for finding recycled paint. So that's more information to come as we release the bids. Another thing that's on here, and I don't want to dwell it too much, is but the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Army Corps of Engineers, we can all agree they're doing a great job protecting our creeks and watersheds, and we certainly all want to have natural habitat and so forth. But one thing that those departments are typically against, with good reasoning, is they don't allow piping or hardscaping of seasonal creeks. Why do I point this out? Because in Mill Valley, we have a very special program here called SLPs, Steps, Lanes, and Paths. And most of our steps, lanes, and paths are built in these drainage basins or water facilities. And it's very difficult to build over a creek, around a creek, or whatnot. And again, not a problem other than it's something that we need to account for. It costs more money, and the city has to make do with the money that they have available. So sometimes some of these goals are in conflict or cause additional work, additional delays, additional costs. So regardless of what a city does or what they have to comply with, how does this affect the DPW? Well, so here's our mission. Most people are familiar with the Department of Public Works, and they think of basically streets and sidewalks and buildings. We're responsible for owning, operating, maintaining, designing improvements, and so forth. There is a whole bunch of other things that actually goes into that. Our primary responsibilities include the things listed on this mission, and I don't need to bore you with that detail, but I do want you to know that your staff and your city council about 5-6 years ago made a real effort to study the vast majority of our facilities to find out what their condition is, to get an assessment of how important it is to do certain things, and to get some ballpark cost estimates for basically repairing them or extending their lifeline. One thing that we can certainly all agree on is the longer we wait to do a certain project, the more it's going to cost. This slide right here basically shows you some of the more detailed things that most citizens don't think about, and this is not by any means a comprehensive list, but it's some of the things that your staff and your council do think about. I want to assure you that why we're asking for your help is so that these things can continue to be maintained and their life extended. It's not just a one-time build a traffic signal and forget it, but it actually takes care, feeding, and so forth. An example of this is the traffic signal at Sycamore Avenue and Camino Alto. There's been a traffic signal there for years. It outlived its useful life, and about 2 years ago, the city was able to get a grant fund and replace that traffic signal, providing an extended life, better safety, visibility for our citizens and residents that are traverse through that critical intersection. So how much does all this cost? Well, to be completely transparent with you, this is a very difficult one for me. As an engineer, I like to be very accurate and precise. The reality is, at this point in time, it's not really feasible to put a fine point and point to a specific number. So we use a range here of need to haves approximately $165 to $175 million. You may notice that if you're paying attention real closely to this or following along on this process, in September of 2023, a city staff report, an attachment had a long list of things that need to be done, various categories, whether they're buildings or roadways or fire, veg management. And if you added up all the ranges in there, it added up somewhere to the $170 to $203 million range. To be truthful with you, I think we need in excess of $220 million But in reality, the point isn't exactly how much we need. The point is that there is a long list of things that the city is responsible for, and they all take time, money, and effort to maintain and own. I would like you to use this picture in particular. I would like you to take a look at this bridge and see if you notice anything about it, and then we'll continue on. So how much money does the city have? Well, without putting an average here or calculating, by looking at the bar chart, you can see the city has, over the last 10 years, somewhere in the vicinity of $1.5 to $1.6 million per year. So let's just call it an average of $1.5 million. And let me go back and say, this is from the city's general fund. So the city's general fund is made up of basically property taxes that you pay, and it's used to fund basically city salaries, city utilities, all the city's needs. But the main thing is, most of it is used up, and the leftovers are available for capital improvement projects. So there is also grant funds and special fund sources, like the sewer rates you pay go fund sewer projects. Some special taxes like the municipal service tax funds roadway improvements and vegetation management improvements. And also, we're lucky that we received some federal government money in fiscal years 2021 and fiscal years 21-22. And this is fiscal money, this is federal money that basically all agencies received some of. The city of Mill Valley got approximately $7.2 million. And your council said, you know what's really important right now to use with this money while we have momentum is let's finish our Blythedale and our downtown paving projects and our downtown enhancement projects. And luckily, without that influx of money, right now, we wouldn't have even started phase 3 of downtown, and we'd be less than halfway done with phase 3 of the East Blythedale project. Now, I certainly can agree that those projects were more expensive and took longer and more pain and suffering to implement than anyone would have preferred, but that is reality in working on a busy corridor or a busy downtown. And I thank the community for supporting the efforts, and I'm really glad we got through that. So how does the city decide what's important? Well, in 2018, we adopted a process, and we said, you know what, we have a long list of projects. How do we really know what is the most important thing to do? So we adopted a matrix that's similar to what other agencies use, and it really focuses on the important things, such as health and safety. Is it a legal mandate? Is it something that the city council adopted as a policy, and so forth? So the CIP selection process that we adopted in 2018 is something that city staff took very seriously, and it involved all stakeholders. We reached out to the various commissions, such as Park and Recreation, Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Emergency Preparedness Committee, and we sought input from them on what projects they want to do. The various departments, whether it was the library, the police department, the fire department, they completed basically what we call applications for funding. Here's a sample of one right here. These applications for funding are very simple. They list the project name, what category it goes to, what it actually includes, some cost estimating for it, and then it automatically calculates some project scores based on whether it does meet council priorities, whether it's funded by others, whether it's a legal mandate, and what the purpose of the project is. The spreadsheet then goes ahead and creates a total score for this, and then that total score is ranked in comparison to all the other projects. Now, I do want to let you know, to be transparent, this is not something that we've formally gone through during the last budget cycle, because quite frankly, it's a huge effort. It takes hundreds, if not thousands, of staff hours to put this together. And the reality is that we already know we don't have enough money to do everything we need. So, in following this process, the next attachment I have here is this CIP scoring matrix. So we went ahead and we took all these spreadsheets and we put it into another scoring matrix. And if you take a look at this scoring matrix, the projects' names are over on the left-hand side. The criteria and score given for each one of those is given throughout the matrix. There's some special considerations given for extra points. And then a total score is calculated on the right, and then these are sorted by ranking. Not surprisingly, health and safety things come up as the most important things to get funded, such as our annual sewer projects, annual street rehab project, vegetation management, the corporation yard, master plan and replacement, some flooding things, East Blythedale, ADA compliance. These are important things that we must comply with and we must move forward with to help protect our citizens. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one thing that City Council was very supportive of in the 2018-ish, 19-ish timeframe, and still supportive of, but in that timeframe, we were actually able to get funding for a series of studies. The studies that were done are listed here in the bullet points, and here are some excerpts from some of those studies. So this handout number 4, you'll see actually a list that was updated recently by the community center staff. Now on the left-hand side, it tells what building is going to be done, tells what type of project needs to happen, and you'll see in the middle, there's some really large numbers. You'll see a couple projects that I'll point out. You'll see a 600,000 HVAC system. That's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. You'll see just 3 units of air conditioner are needed, and it's about $600,000. You'll also see a roof replacement for around $600,000 a little bit further down. The building's about 20 years old. These things last about 15 to 20 years, and we need to proactively plan and repair these things before there's an issue. An example would be the leaks at this particular one is a roof replacement for the community center. I think we've learned our lesson from the library, which is a beautiful building, but for many years it had leak issues, and of course that's a problem when you have wet water going into books. Luckily that was taken care of a few years ago now, but the library, for chance, is a special roof with special redwood shingling that has costs associated with it. So this is just an excerpt, and it's a long list, and I do want to point out that besides the big $600,000 and $250,000 project, your staff is also paying attention to some of the smaller things that members of the public probably don't think about when they go use the community center. I am sure when you use the restroom, you wash your hands and you use the dryer. Well, that dryer has a lifespan, and it typically isn't last forever. And you see on this list, we got about 9,500 reserved for replacing hand dryers. Same thing with the spa. The spa is very busy and very maintenance heavy. The spa pump needs a new motor every 5 to 7 years, and that's around $5,000. Even a refrigerator, right? We have many events there, we rent it out. Well, the refrigerator doesn't last forever. So we've got a refrigerator budgeted for $15,000. So a lot of these things actually come out of the operation budget of either the buildings department or the community center, parks and recreation departments. But in reality, staff is tracking all these things and making sure they're taken care of. Another excerpt from one of those studies from the facilities is this cost by trade excerpt. Back in 2018, I think we commissioned the study, maybe 2019, and it was finished and accepted by council in May of 2020, which we should point out, May of 2020 was the height of the pandemic, so all these estimates were basically done before prices escalated for one reason or the other, and 2 obvious ones that come to mind is there's a lot less contractors now, and supply chain issues are very different in 2024 than they were in early 2020 when this was completed. But what you'll see in this particular table is costs for projects and descriptions by trade, and you'll see one sample is City Hall Fire Station 6. The sprinkler system is needed. There's no sprinkler system at City Hall. The subtotal estimate by the consultant at the time was $152,000 and change. You notice a little further to the right, we actually have a column called EMG rate and TBD rate, and let me explain that a little bit. EMG was the consultant that the city hired to do this building and facility condition assessment. They met with staff, they walked around all the buildings, community center, PSB, City Hall, golf clubhouse, and they looked at all the nooks and crannies. They looked at electrical outlets, they looked at light switches, they looked at plumbing, they reviewed generators or what have you, window conditions, gutters, tried to assess the condition and how critical it was to address some of these things right away or what could wait, and here's what typical costs for those types of things are. When staff got that, we were like, wow, there's a big variety here and there's a big cost swing on some of these things. Some of them sounded realistic to us, some of them didn't. So we went ahead and we decided, let's get that peer reviewed. So EMG was one company that provided cost estimates. Another company called TBD also provided cost estimates. And what you'll see in those columns on the right is the unit price cost estimate for each one of those. So whether that's by square foot or a linear foot or a plumbing pipe linear foot or whatever it is, you'll see, and I pointed out and I circled City Hall and Fire Station 6, EMG has a square foot rate of $8, whereas TBD has $12.50. It doesn't sound that much, and maybe it isn't that much if you're only doing 10 square feet, but it's a 56% variation, and over the course of a $152,000 project, that's a big variation. Is it $152,000, or do we have to increase that amount by 56%? Not to mention, reminder, that was done in 2019, 2020, 4 years have gone by, prices have escalated, and I'm sure they didn't escalate at the assumed escalation rate at the time. So it's also similar to the community center samples that I showed. This includes little things like an exterior wall, a heat place repumpment a little bit further down. It's only $1,600 is the estimated subtotal. You'll see EMG's rate is more or less $1,200. TBD assumes it's going to be around $3,450 per unit. So staff went ahead and we took a factor of that based on when we thought it was going to happen and what was a more realistic estimate. What this really gets to is the difficulty in placing an accurate pinpoint on the total cost. If we can't agree on what a $152,000 sprinkler system is going to cost, or a $1,500 roof hatch or heat pump or whatever the sample I call out, the totals, of course, are going to be different. So what we're trying to show here is that there was a process and there was consideration to everything. The next handout we have, what we called handout 6 right here, is titled City Facilities Assessment. The key takeaway from this, you'll see over on the left, it has each facility, and then each fiscal year as we go throughout, there's an EMG price quotation or estimate, I should say, and there's a TBD estimate for each one. What I think I want to point out here is that the variances throughout the years, again, go from 17.6% at the bottom to 62% to 23.5%. These are large swings and large cost issues. Overall, if you look at the far right, you'll see that TBD estimates there's about $14.6 million worth of facility needs. TBD includes about $18.6 million worth of needs. Those are large numbers. I should also point out that at the time we did this study, and you'll notice over on the left, this includes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings, but it does not include the community center. The thinking at the time when we started this was the community center was only 15 years old. It wasn't that urgent to do it. In retrospect, that was a mistake, but luckily we have good community center staff that's watching out for the buildings and trying to protect the city's assets. And we do have a list and some total dollars for that. Another study that was done is bridges and culverts. And I have to fess up. Many people ask me throughout my time here, what are the things that have you worried? What is it that you're actually concerned about with the city of Mill Valley? My top 3 are always staffing. Do we have the right people in the right place? Training, knowledge, seeing the big picture, focusing on details. That's a continual study in any business. I will mention for sure in maintenance and engineering, it's really hard to find qualified people, so we're very lucky here in the city of Mill Valley. The second one is sewer lines. Sewer lines is just one of those things that you don't want anything to go wrong with, and I can't help but be nervous that at some point in time, one of our 6-inch sewer mains that goes under some road somewhere is going to burst, and we're going to be on the news with an overflowing spout of raw sewage flowing somewhere. Hopefully that's not going to happen, but that's a natural fear of mine. And the next one, I'm always worried those winter storms. There's just so much that could go wrong, whether it's flooding, whether it's trees that get knocked over, whether it's landslides that happen. We're susceptible. We live in an area where there's wide weather patterns. You know, we go from drought to too much rain. The too much rain is very heavy on our tree routes. It's very heavy on our slopes. And we just don't know what's going to happen. We're prepare as best as we can, and we inspect our facilities and so forth, but naturally, any of us that care about what's going on here in Mill Valley are concerned about that. However, one that's quickly rising for a very specific region is bridges and culverts. I am very happy to say that, again, back in 2018-19 timeframe, council supported a study of our bridges and culverts throughout town to figure out what the condition of our bridges and culverts throughout town were. And they actually came out pretty good. Unbeknownst to most people, we have in excess of 80 of these types of facilities. Most of them you just roll over or walk over and you don't really know, they blend into the background. However, two specific examples in the last couple years that really came to light will show how critical these are. So the first one I don't have a picture of, but it's Miller Ave. And in the study, Miller Ave was identified as it's in okay condition, but it's something to keep and watch on. Well, staff has been keeping a watch on it, and when I'm talking about a Miller Ave bridge, I'm talking specifically there's two bridges on either side, more or less, of the laundromat. As you leave the passageway and come into downtown, or as you leave downtown and you come into the passageway, where it narrows down to a one-lane road, there's two large structures that you're driving over, or biking or walking over, whatever have you. And we take them for granted. Well, they're supported, they're old, they were built in who knows when, early 1900s. They're supported by basically wood superstructures and wood decking. That wood is slowly rotting out over the years and getting weaker or weaker. It got to the point where our structural engineer recommended that we do not allow trucks or fire trucks to use this route, and we shut it down to those vehicles. That would have been a huge impact to our community. Not to mention if a fire truck can't get over that to get for life safety issues, that's an obvious problem. But the other one is we don't want trucks going up and down Blythedale. Miller Ave is our truck route. And regardless if they were to go down Miller and then go up Millwood to get to downtown, or they were just going to go through Blythedale, that would have been an impact to our community. So very lucky, again, I mentioned we have a great team. Our two deputy directors, Mark Newman and Jared Barrio, developed a team that, with their teams, developed a solution to this problem. We were basically able to replace the rotted wood with steel beams, and we were able to do it with our own staff. So certainly that saved money, but more importantly, it saved a lot of time, and it saved a lot of difficulty for the community if those bridges were shut down. So I'm very happy that the team was able to both engineer solutions and to come up with solutions with very little to no impact to the community. The next one that I'm sure many of you have noticed is what we call SLP 340, and this is what we have pictures of. SLP 340 is kind of towards the edge of West Blythedale Avenue and Blythedale Canyon. And it's maybe a 400, 600, 700 foot path that parallels West Blythedale Ave before you enter railroad grade trail to get up Mount Tamalpais. It's a great dirt trail, but to be truthful with you, we didn't really know there was a bridge there. About a year and a half ago, we got some notice from some neighbors that there's a bump towards the end of the trail, and we looked at it and we said, yeah, it's a bump. We didn't really know what was causing it. The bump grew slower. People would say, hey, mountain bikes like it because we can use it as a jump as we go over, but pedestrians, it could be a tripping hazard. Quite frankly, we didn't think much of a tripping hazard because SLPs, by their nature, have roots and tripping hazards on them. When we did a little further investigation, we found out, and this is kind of embarrassing to admit, that there is a large culvert there. So this culvert was probably established by the railroads to go over a creek. It provides access for the utilities. There's a PG&E overhead line in that area, and the city didn't know who owned it, who maintained it, who was responsible for it, but we did know it was getting more and more urgent, and there was all sorts of environmental concerns because what was happening, the seasonal creek really rages during winter storms, and it was quite frankly just scouring and collapsing the culvert underneath. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we built a split rail fence to kind of focus pedestrians and cyclists to the safe area. Before that, it was just wide open. And when I say wide open, there was a bridge or a culvert, but it didn't really have any boundaries or fences because it wasn't perceived to be a bridge or a culvert. It was just part of the nature trail. So this culvert had been covered by basically redwood duff and dirt and debris over the natural dirt and debris over the years. Anyway, last year's storms really brought it to head. The vertical supports of the culvert were basically eradicated by the creek. We had to take down the remaining part of the structure to make it safe so kids, dog walkers, cyclists wouldn't try to navigate over the creek, which would be unsafe. And now, of course, we're working on the solution. I'm happy to say that we are near solution. We have some temporary bridge design done. We're working with manufacturers. But we really didn't have an idea of the size or scope of this project when we were investigating. We thought it was somewhere around $350,000, considering what type of design, what type of environmental permits to get something that would last. I'm happy to report that we think it's going to be a lot less than that, and we have a temporary solution that we're hoping to implement within the next several months. And depending on that temporary solution, which is a prefabricated PVC type bridge, is what we're honing in on right now. That may last 20 or 30 years itself, so that's a good temporary solution. But suffice it to say, bridges and culverts are critical pieces of infrastructure that need care, feeding, maintaining. One of the other studies that we did in that time frame we refer to as our storm drain and flood management plan. What I'm showing you right here is just a portion of some of the costs identified in that study. That study was something that was done over the course of about 2 years with our partners at the county, adjacent agencies, and a flood and storm drain management committee that reviewed several iterations of this and seeing what is important to the community, what is or what isn't feasible, the differences between living, in the flats or living in the hills. How does it impact everybody? Where does the water go? What are some of the potential solutions? So this study identified sea level rise as an issue, and it's not shown here, but $21 million worth of sea level rise improvements should probably be made. Also storm drain improvements, although this chart says storm drains, there's an additional $7 million worth of projects that are storm drain specific that could be approved, or our storm drain systems, so I should say not just storm drains, but the pipes as well. And our creek systems, about $47 million in identified needs to manage our creek system and the flow that comes into and out of them. So as a result of this study, staff has really ramped up their engagement with Flood Control Zone 3 staff. We've requested almost $6 million as a set-aside of part of their budget. They have awarded us some. We've got $75 million identified based on the various concepts in the storm drain and flood management plan, and we are working with our partners to secure some of that. This might be a point where I do talk about Flood Control Zone 3. What some of you may or may not know is you pay what's in essence a parcel tax. Each parcel in the city of Mill Valley pays into Flood Control Zone 3. Flood Control Zone 3 isn't defined by city borders, it's actually defined by the watershed. Our watershed includes Homestead, Tamalpais Community Service Area, goes as far south as Marin City. And all those areas have flood needs. Mill Valley contributes a share to it, and then the Flood Control Zone manages and oversees and funds some Mill Valley projects, but some projects go to other agencies as well. So that's something that we're working with county staff on. The typical project that folks are most aware of that Public Works done is streets. So I've got a slide here on paving. Thank you very much to the community and to council who supported what we call our municipal service tax years ago. It's been something that's been adopted twice, and most recently I think it was 2016. And it was set such that the city could improve and dedicate funding towards roadways and vegetation management, fire, access, egress, and safety projects. So not to bore you too much, but there is a regional measure called PCI, and that stands for Pavement Condition Index. And there are goals that City Council has established, and we study every couple years. And depending how much money you spend, you can improve your roadways a certain amount. Very happy to report the City of Mill Valley has the third highest roadway system, rated system in Marin County, with the two that are in front of us being agencies that are pretty small and don't have as much wear and tear on their roads or as much roadways to maintain. So this is a great accomplishment. I will also say, no matter how high our PCI is, I can attest firsthand that folks are going to call and say the roads aren't in good shape. Yes, it's great that you paved Miller Ave around $18 million and Camino Alto around $2 or $3 million, Blythedale around $12 million, but the road in front of my house is in bad shape. What are you going to do? When are you going to get to it? Well, the answer is we have a 5-year paving plan, and we are getting to every street. The goal is to get to every street, so it has an overall PCI improvement of somewhere in the 74 range. In specifics, what does that mean for this year's project? This year, we're trying to pave approximately 20 streets. Our engineers did a great job getting the plans and specifications done on time. Our goal was to get the bids out in January. Strategy there is the earlier in the season you can bid the project, the more contractors will actually chase your project and be interested in it. The more contractors you have, the better price you get. And basically January is your at the front end of the curve of when projects are put out. Well, unfortunately, things are out of our control. We only had 2 bidders this year. The lowest bid was approximately $400,000 over the engineer's estimate. It's just an unpredictable world that we live in right now, how much competition there will be, how much cost there will be. No problem. Staff, as good stewards of your public funding, said we can't swallow an additional $400,000. That's just too much, and we wouldn't be able to continue our paving program and meet council's needs if we have that much overage that we need to spend. So we rebid it. Unfortunately, the result was there was only 1 bidder that was qualified on the second bid. We did revise the scope a little bit, change the specs, try to make it more attractive and less costly. Unfortunately, that qualified bid is still approximately 25% or about $200,000 over the engineer's estimate. And that's even an updated engineer's estimate. So right now, there's not necessarily enough contractors or materials to go around, and costs are high, but it is something that we're trying to navigate to help the community. Some other significant projects that we have, and again, this list was put together last September, October of 2023. They still hold true, and these are critical projects that your teams are working on or have in the background: retaining walls, the corporation yard, playground replacement. That's a master plan that certainly the Park and Rec staff is interested in doing. ADA upgrades. These are all things that we want to do and we want to fund and we want to implement as quickly as we can. I showed it on previous screens, but I didn't really talk about it. There are also things that are considered quality of life issues. So certainly the must-haves include roadways, fire, police. Quality of life issues, which is a council priority, by the way, are things like parks, ball fields, and these are things that we want to implement, but there quite simply isn't necessarily money to implement. So a particular thing that jumps out right now, because it just came up at the Park and Rec annual retreat, is the volleyball court. So this is great. The city's Park and Rec department with some community volunteers have applied for a grant and have raised some funds. So hopefully that's something we can implement. But there are, of course, issues with permits, where it goes, approval, who's implementing, what it takes to do it. So we're going to work through those, but this is just an example of things that we want to do. And quite simply, the things with a single dollar sign on the right-hand side are kind of lower cost, and higher cost issues are $4 signs or $3 signs. And this is just kind of a tracking of things that we are aware of, and we do want to go ahead and work. What does this equate to? Well, generally, the must-haves are around 165 to 175. The quality of life issues are in the $25 to $35 million range. We absolutely have to reiterate that these are large dollar amounts with large dollar swings, and we can't predict how much things are going to cost even this summer, let alone 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, with any certainty. So we call this rough order of magnitude. One thing I do want to point out, I went back and I shared with you that we get an average of $1.5 million a year approximately. So being an engineer, I do want to be accurate, and I do want to say, how long is that going to take for us to get to our current needs? Well, that's 133 years. Our facilities need more maintenance and operation support than waiting 133 years before they can be rehabilitated. Lastly, I want to, on this particular slide, I want to share with you the pictures, and you probably recognize them now. This is our beloved Hockey Park bridge, pedestrian and bicycle bridge, and it is a heavily used bridge. It provides access to the multi-use path, to the school, to the fields. Well, a couple Novembers ago, and I know it's November because it involved the November break activity, some joggers were running over the bridge, and they called city staff and they said, "Hey, I noticed your bridge is kind of bouncier than usual. I don't know if anything's wrong, but I'd like to report it to you." Thank goodness they did. Staff went ahead and we inspected it, and sure enough, we saw these piling right here had rotted. created an emergency project. You can see on the left how far it was split, and on the right how far it was split. And we had lost 2 of the posts. It's something that wasn't on staff's radar. It's something that wasn't in a rehab program. It's something that wasn't caught on the bridge and culvert study of 4 or 5 years ago. It actually precipitated the bridge and culvert study, to be fair to the consultant that provided that study. But it's an example of things that come up. So city staff was quickly able to rehabilitate this, get a contractor on board, get a structural engineer on board, communicate with the school. But of course, it caused a lot of headaches. Some of the comments we got from some parents of school children was, can you have a rowboat go across the creek and get our kids back and forth to school? And sure, I guess we could have. I don't know how much that would have cost or how effective that would have been. But we do now, and if I go back to the very first slide, if you look real closely at that picture, you'll see that there's a number of steel casings around some of those pilings. So we are safe and we are copacetic for the foreseeable future with that bridge. All right, so we mentioned that there was an advisory panel to council last late summer and fall. Well, as part of that panel, there were a number of subcommittees that were involved with putting these recommendations together, and I was working with the infrastructure subcommittee and funding subcommittee. And they helped me put together this presentation. What was important to them? How could I break this down to laymen? Here is a handful of questions they asked on my first draft of the presentation. Rather than building it into my presentation on individual slides or whatnot, I thought it would be most efficient just to share these questions with you, as I expect you would have similar questions to what those other citizen volunteers did. First question, I'll go through these as quickly as I can. How is the city reserving money for the unexpected? Well, actually, there's a council mandated policy of 15%, of reserving 15% of the prior year's budget. Additionally, past practice of the finance department, city manager, and council has been, let's save an additional 10% on top of that, just in case of the unexpected. So what does that mean in real dollars? Currently, we're sitting on reserves of about $13 million. Why is that important? Besides the obvious that I just showed you, we might have a bridge piling that collapses that's going to cost something, or we have an SLP 340 that might collapse for $340,000 that we need to repair immediately. There's other things that may happen. Recently, unfortunately, the city was involved in a lawsuit, and the city was required to pay a claimant about $4.5 million. So we just don't know when those things are going to come up. The reality is some of that's covered by insurance, but not all of it is, so it does cost the city money. How does the city incorporate the climate action plan or sustainability goals into its projects? Well, the first thing is staff has to be aware of them and to anticipate what some of the needs are. So we did point out to the climate action plan needing recycling, recycled materials, or whether it's understanding that we need to have zero emission vehicles. Then city staff basically complies with it and follows those, we'll call them mandates, funded or unfunded. Council policies and priorities is what the city staff is responsible for implementing as we go through our projects. How to coordinate with other agencies. Regular and routine communications with our other agencies, whether that's county staff, Southern Marin Fire, SASM. I personally attend a monthly Marin Public Works Association meeting. When we have projects that are near boundaries or may impact one project or another, we send 65, 90% design plans. We ask for their comments on them. We implement, so forth. So there's constant communications with our stakeholders. And by the way, we consider citizens stakeholders. So whenever we have projects in a certain area, we try to share those plans with the neighborhood and get their input on those plans or projects before we totally finalize or bring it to council. Because we generally don't want to have any surprises, specifically negative surprises where we would have to undo something. We want to help the community. Are we done with this list of unfunded projects? Is complete? Unfortunately, not even close. By the time we finish this list, we'll have to basically start it all over again. Roadways is a sample example. A good roadway slurry seal treatment, which is your basic treatment, is basically a thick paint that's put on the road. It's expected to last 7 years. So you're also, that depends on how much sun, how much traffic is exposed to the street, but you can slurry seal a street 3 times, so more or less every 20-ish years you have to completely repave the street. Our goal is more or less to keep a PCI at 74, which means we should be touching or maintaining every street 7-ish to 10-year range. Now there's certain streets that are at such a condition that a slurry treatment isn't actually the appropriate treatment and it needs a more expensive rehab. But the short answer is this is not complete. By the time we're finished fixing one guardrail, some other guardrail will have rusted out and be time to replace. By the time we paint the community center, certainly the library will be needed to be painted or they'll need to be upgraded. So how much money do we have? Right now, we currently have about $30 million in cash and investments, and when I say we, the city. The reality is this varies widely, monthly, and it's not the best representation of what the city can do. The more accurate representation is really the budget. And so right now, the budgeted revenue for this fiscal year is around $52 million. Budgeted expenses around $51 million. If everything holds true with the budget, that gives the city about $1 million of general fund monies that they can use for capital improvement projects. How does this incorporate the DEI goals? Very similar with the climate action plan and the sustainability goals. Staff has to be aware of, involved in, and buy into those DEI goals so that they actually comply with them. So the obvious one that comes to mind for me for Public Works is accessibility. I mentioned pedestrian ramps, which provides access to all our citizens. Certainly procurement for contracts, vendors, and so forth. We're complying with DEI requirements on those types of things. Does this end the need for the MST, Municipal Service Tax? Well, that's not really for Public Works to answer, as we're just telling you what our needs are. But in my mind, municipal service tax is incredibly valuable. It's a specific funded source for roadways and fire safety. And depending on what amount of sales tax percent is or isn't approved or set to the voters or whatnot, there may be an opportunity to change the municipal service tax. But in my mind, I kind of keep them separate. So the next one is, should city try for a bond measure? Again, Department of Public Works isn't an expert on this, but our understanding is that bond measures are possible, but they have some constraints. So first of all, they have costs, and interest rates right now are not good, so it would be expensive to do it. The second one is, to do a bond measure, the city has to have collateral or assets that they can put up in case something doesn't happen. So the library building, for example, would be an asset, or the PSB or City Hall. Now those are worth a lot of money, but they're not worth enough collateral for the $200 million that we need. So maybe there's a hybrid bond that a portion could or couldn't be done, but the Department of Public Works staff will go ahead and leave that up to the policymakers to figure out what type of sales tax or revenue generating source we use. So hopefully that answered many questions and provided some education for the community on the city's infrastructure needs. I certainly welcome anyone to give me a call or an email at the contact information shown on the screen with any questions, and I will be happy to walk through the Department of Public Works perspective with you. Thank you.